You know the guy that interviews young Dana in that classic UFC video? That was me. And I was also the executive running the show when the Fertitas bought it. Let's talk old school UFC and MMA current events on Wormy's Wisdom, here on the Todd Atkins MMA Podcast Network. Okay, whenever.
All right, this is Todd Atkins. I'm back with James Werme and another Werme's Wisdom. And for everyone who checks out the channel, we appreciate it. Make sure to like and subscribe the video, share it with somebody, subscribe to the channel. And James, I just wanted to give you a chance to we had talked a little bit about Jake Paul MVP MMA card when it was first announced, like Gina and Ronda. And that's pretty much all that had been announced at the time. So maybe now that we have the full card, maybe kind of give your opening thoughts.
Well, thank you for having me again. It's great to be here and wonderful to see you and all the listeners. Yeah, so I mean, unbelievable announcements, and we teased it and you called it with the Ngannou. I think that came out like a couple days after we spoke. So you called that one, and what a signing that is. I mean, fantastic. And really, the whole card is stacked, I think. And we also talked about, is it going to be young up and comers? Is it going to be old faves? And I think it's kind of both, right? With the Diaz signing, the Ngannou signing, the Perry signing. These are interesting fights, attractive fights. I think fights that people want to see. So really impressed with what they have done and what they seem to be laying the groundwork for. I mean, the purse has got to be massive, which means their expected return has to be massiver, right? So they believe in this,
Yeah,
and they believe in what they're doing, and I think it's an interesting route to take. While the UFC kind of has its roster and doesn't really have huge stars. I don't want to take anything away from their champions or their stars, but MVP has gone out and signed some really, really big names, significant signings. So, they are putting in a serious effort, and you got to believe that this is the beginning of something, I think.
yeah. I think some people. It's funny when you read Twitter. Some people say this is a one-off. I don't believe that, unless it just tanks. I don't believe that to be the case. I think would be ideal is like we had talked about offline, maybe doing a show every couple of months because
Yep.
Netflix doesn't want to have all the fights. Apparently, when they were dealing with UFC, from what I've seen talked about, is they only wanted the numbered events. They didn't want all this fight night and Apex and all this stuff. They just want the numbers events and that's it. So they just want big events, which means they don't have to have something every Saturday.
Right. And that's not the worst way to go because you can build these super cards, not have to worry about keeping a huge roster of fighters busy and just allow the build, right? Allow the build towards these big fights, these big events, pack them as big as you can with big names and big fights. So I like it. I mean, the UFC model and doing that many shows is awesome and great for the sport, really, and it has served the sport well. But I think overall, the talent pool you could argue is a bit watered down, and the excitement from event to event, familiarity breeds comfort. When you're doing these big shows every couple months, you're really going to get great momentum and great anticipation. So, I look back at when I was doing shows and we did 5 shows a year, that was our schedule. And of course, we would have loved to do more. But doing 5 shows a year allowed us to, in a sense, take our time and craft the card and really build to something. So, I think it's a different version of MMA that, maybe we've never seen. I think it's something that everyone should note that the UFC has never had a domestic competitor that was paying as much or more than them for top quality talent. So this is really uncharted territory. And you can see that these guys are serious about it. They're looking to make a splash. And yeah, the only way I see this not being a recurring thing is if it doesn't do well. And based on the signings, I don't see how it can't not do well. I think I thought the Gina and Ronda was enough. Um, but clearly they're out to make a statement. Clearly they're letting people know that they're willing to sign the top talent and do MMA on a recurring basis. We'll see. But I think it is really interesting and of note that the UFC has never had this type of domestic competition. So
Yeah,
it'll
and
be
I think
interesting to
the
see what
Jake
happens.
Paul boxing matches led to this, which tells me that they would be willing to do more. Because it make no sense to do a one-off if they're going to sign these people.
No, it doesn't. And the other thing about doing spread out shows is you don't have to carry a large talent roster. You don't have to carry a bunch of fighters. You can almost treat, so it's recurring shows and it's three, four, five, whatever, 6 times a year, but you don't have to necessarily sign men or women to long-term deals. You can kind of see what happens and react to the outcomes or the public perception or all those things. So it gives you a little bit of breathing room. I mean, obviously they're paying a lot. But again, they wouldn't be paying that unless they expected the return. So interesting attack, interesting format, interesting scheduling, interesting. The whole thing is pretty interesting. I think it's exciting for the sport and for the fans for sure. I mean, they're giving fans, Ngannou's coming back, Diaz is coming back, Ronda and Gina coming back. So that's a big deal.
Yeah. Now they're kind of in the same position you were with SEG and maybe the early Zuffa was. How many shows a year were you guys doing again?
We did 5 shows a year. So
Yes,
every
and
every couple months we did a show.
when you have that extra time, maybe talk about that compared to like I mean, I know you weren't doing shows where you were having to do every Saturday like they're doing now, but to have that extra time, talk about how that could in a way something that could help Netflix as far as like building and that kind of stuff.
Well, you get to take a breather. The UFC schedule and the schedule they've been under for many years is incredible. The fact that they have been able to crank out as many shows as they do, as they have, is a credit to the fighters, the staff, the production people, everything involved. It is a gigantic undertaking to do that many shows. Back in the mid 90s, we felt like it was a gigantic undertaking to do 5 shows. And it was because of the size of our staff and the size of our budgets and the limitations, whether it was athletic commissions or cable systems. We were always fighting and we needed time to do that. We needed time to be in court, right? But what it does is it allows the company or the promoter or whomever the network to kind of take a breather and not be under the gun like, okay, what are we doing next week? What are we doing next month? It's like, you can sit back and say, okay, what did we do right? And what did we do wrong? And how can we make this better? And what signings made sense and which ones didn't? And you can kind of chart your path. It gives you, I would say in general, a breather and from a management side, from a work side, but from a fighter side, and we talked about this, it allows more build and more momentum. And especially these days when, content and hype it allows that machine to take over. So you move from essentially a doing shows machine to a promotion machine, and then you have your show. And then you're a promotion machine, and then you have your show. Versus, we can't dwell on anything. We can't worry about anything because we got a show next Saturday. Well, we got a show, in 2 weeks. It puts everyone involved under the gun. So, I like that. I like that spread because it does allow you to take a step back and assess and plan and build and things like that, which I don't think necessarily you can do when you're under the grind and just got to keep the train rolling, right?
Are you surprised that they're doing 11 fights for first foray?
Um, I don't know. I don't know the number of fights. I think it's not necessarily about, we're doing this many. It's more about you kind of have to do at least this many to qualify as like a quality card and give people their money's worth. Although again, this is for many people, for most people, they don't see Netflix as any type of pay wall, because they already have it and it's a minimal monthly subscription. So I think as long as you're doing I think 6, 8 fights is probably your minimum. And then you stack it on because don't forget, anything can happen in the fights. You get a few quick finishes and suddenly you're into the middle of the card and you've only been on the air for an hour, hour and a half. So, you want to give people their money's worth. Um, you want to give them plenty of fights. You also want to take a look at these fighters and give them an opportunity to shine and perform because you may want to use them again. And based on that performance, that's why I say is in this situation, and I don't know the specifics of their contracts. I don't know if these are one fight deals or 3 fight deals, whatever. But I would assume that they're on the lower side to give themselves the freedom and opportunity to move on, or or try to capture someone that really shines that night.
Could it be an advantage in that? I was asking Miguel this last night. I want to get kind of your feelings on it. If you're a fighter who's getting paid a good amount by Netflix, even maybe the middle, where they're getting paid more than they would in the UFC. The UFC guarantees fighters 3 fights a year, usually, unless they turn them down or whatever. That's when it can change. As long as they take them, they have to give them three, um, or they have to pay them.
Is that true?
Yeah,
That's
they
true?
can't turn it down. That changes things. But if
Okay.
they give them 3 fights and they take them, or they don't give them three, then they have to pay them, whatever the difference. But what I'm saying is, fighters who are probably getting paid more than they would in the UFC, is this kind of an advantage where they could say, I don't need to sign a long term deal. I can do one and then one.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely.
So it gives Netflix a little bit of an advantage there.
Well, I mean, we can talk about the many advantages that Netflix is going to get from doing this event because I'll tell you, any free agent in the world, any MMA professional fighter in the world is looking at what Netflix is paying and saying to their management, I want to go there. Get me on those cards. They're paying people a lot or more than the current market or what the UFC is paying. So yes,
Plus, they're on
I
a bigger
think
platform now. You can almost say, if I go to Netflix, I'm getting more views than I would on Paramount with the UFC.
right, which is exactly why Netflix can pay more is because since they have more eyeballs, they can charge more for sponsorships or commercial placement or anything like that, and they can turn around and invest that in the fighters. So yeah, Netflix has, like you say, having that platform to be able to walk in, whether it's a fighter or whether it's an advertiser, and say, we have 300 million households worldwide. You want to be a worldwide star, or you want to get in front of 8, 10, 12, 15, 20 million eyeballs that night. I don't know many other opportunities that can provide that much attention for that span of time. So
Paramount can't.
no, God, no.
Yeah.
No, not even close. And the UFC's been willing has shown that they're not willing to pay exorbitant amounts. So you've got Paramount, which doesn't have the distribution muscle, and you got the UFC that is kind of like, no, this is how we do it, and this is how we're doing it. So yeah, the MVP Netflix thing blows that out of the water because we have all these homes, so we can invest, and we're going to go out and get the best fighters we can, young, old, male, female, uh, American, international. They have this freedom, right? The deep pockets, the wide distribution, and the people, the MMA professionals that are willing to jump. Remember, I mean, there hasn't been any place to go for fighters. Now there's a place to go that's going to get me in front of a wider audience and make me a bigger payday. So, like you say, I don't have to fight 3 times a year. it's actually a movement towards boxing model, to tell you the truth. Um, so yeah, I mean it really busts open the MMA world, I think. I really do.
No, they have an undercard. There's some good fights on there. I mean, they have ones that I was really looking at was like Makayev Morales, I'm sorry. He was a champion and won FC for a while. He beat Demetrius Johnson. And then
Hmm.
they had a rematch where Johnson beat him. Um, One of these prospects, Pernassi from France, he's a big time prospect. But I felt it would be important. They also got Alex Pereira's sister fighting on the card,
I,
but
I
I
saw, yeah.
thought it was important for them to sign maybe one American that, for example, Gable Stevenson, this guy that everybody's looking at. UFC kind of has on a track in LFA or whatever. If they could have pulled him, that would have been a big kind of like you know.
Yeah, I
How
guess,
important
but
was it to do something like that? Because it doesn't. They didn't. Like I said, they got the big names like you were talking about. But if they could have got one in there who's a new one that they could develop along when they do these shows, maybe that would have
hmm
been a good punch. Rather, not to say that some of these fights on the undercard aren't good, they are. But I'm just saying a guy who maybe other promotions want,
hmm
you know, that's
Yeah, I don't
American.
know. Yeah, I guess, but you've got a bunch of American studs on there already, and old faves. What I thought was interesting is the amount of international flavor, and I think that is purposeful. Uh, there's Brazilian, like you say. There's a Brit. Uh, Obviously Ngannou. It's a pretty international crowd, which makes perfect sense because Netflix has those eyeballs all over the world. Did they need to sign a hot young up and comer? I don't know. I mean, I didn't even think they needed to go beyond Gina and Ronda, and they've gone far beyond that. So who knows if that's that'll be 2.0 or what? I don't think I think it's difficult to predict who or how they're going to sign fighters for that show because it seems like they're kind of sitting back and saying, well, what do people want to see? What's interesting? It's kind of, you take the guardrails off or you take away the tunnel vision. And like I say, in the UFC, it's such a train that keeps rolling and such a machine that has to keep going that you start to get narrow-minded and you don't want to veer off that path. And clearly these guys are not afraid to get two 40-year-old women uh, in the main event or go and sign one of the biggest heavyweights that had left the sport because he went for greener pastures in boxing. So I think kind of all the bets are off. And who knows? Maybe they did go after that guy, and maybe he had other plans or other thoughts, or maybe they didn't. So I think it's part of the fun, right, is the unpredictability, and they have certainly been unpredictable, and I think they delivered. So do they? I don't think they need. I think they have what they need already. They just need to hope that everyone shows up and fights their ass off, makes weight and fights their ass off, right? That's the most important thing because they set the table. So the fights will dictate as they always do.
And one other thing that demonstrates the power of Netflix, right, on Paul Tyson, even though Paul Tyson wasn't, no, most people didn't sound like they were too happy with it. Serrano and Taylor fought on the undercard, had an amazing fight. Next time they rematched, they headlined Madison Square Garden.
Right,
And
right,
going into that card, no one was saying, "Oh, can't wait to see Serrano and Taylor."
right.
That was
Yeah, I
just
mean,
a fight that happened to be on the card.
yeah, for everyone on the undercard, they are incentivized to put on a great show. That's for sure. Because of the exposure, because of the purse, which is great. Anytime you can uh, anytime the fighters adopt an attitude of aggressiveness and I want to prove myself and I'm going to seize this moment, right? that's back in my day, I felt like the fighters always fought like that because it was rare that someone would come in on their debut and lose and continue at least right away. So I always felt like in the early days, in the SEG days, uh, they came in to prove themselves, to seize the moment, to fight their ass off. So I love that, and I think that's also great for the fans, and it sets up, it could be a great night. I don't think you're going to see a lot of tentative fighting. I think people will smell the opportunity and hopefully go after it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if there's a Taylor Serrano that emerges from that undercard.
Sure.
Because the power of the UFC isn't really creating that these days. They have some guys that are popular. I mean, now Spurs popular, and
Hmm.
I think Ilia Topuria is growing an audience in Spain or whatever, and I think people that watch the sport appreciate his talent. But
I was going to say the
I don't.
go ahead.
They're not catching lightning in a bottle with somebody.
Right. And t stars do not grow on trees, but it is the show's job to create stars and make their champions into stars as best they can. But again, we're back to that tunnel vision where you're kind of stuck with what you've got, and when you carry such a huge roster, it's tough to go, outside the family. It's tough to go out of bounds. Um, and it could happen that what I was going to say is like having all those young fighters on the MVP card, it kind of balances out the potential because listen, Gina and Ronda could come in and have lost a few steps. Nate could come in and have lost a few steps.
I
So
thought
the
he didn't
bat,
look good against Tony Ferguson on his last fight in the UFC.
yeah,
Neither one of them did.
age is a factor. Anyone that knows fights knows that age is a factor for sure. So, they've balanced it with some young quality fighters, and that'll help if the older faves come back and really don't perform, which is certainly a possibility. And which is why Dana and the UFC tend to not go that route, right? They want to build the people on their roster. They don't want to be bringing in older fighters because older fighters are going to want two things. They're going to want short contracts and big purses. So, and that's not the UFC's groove. So, yeah, I mean, we'll see. We'll see.
Now, I kind of wanted to pivot a little bit because we've been talking about this Eddie Hearn interview that I sent you,
Hmm.
where he was talking about kind of the challenge that he thinks UFC is going to experience in boxing. And obviously, he has his reasons to feel that way because he's a competitor. But what did you think of his comments about it's going to be difficult to do a little bit of boxing, a lot of the UFC, a little bit of slap, compared to what we're doing, which is all we're doing is boxing?
Yeah, I mean, there's no substitute for experience, and there's no substitute for hard work. But I don't think I'm out of line here saying that, Dana's probably spread pretty thin these days. But that doesn't mean he's not putting his full attention towards Zuffa boxing, which seems to be his primary endeavor these days. But what I would say is kind of more important than that is that the whole Zuffa boxing thing with the ring and the what's the other entity involved? They just it seems confused. It seems like they're not sure what they're going to do, or at least the fans aren't sure what they're going to do, or who they're going to see fighting, or where they're going to see those fighters fighting. So, I don't know that it's so much you have to do this full time to be good at it, as much as it is like you have to have a focus and a clear direction as far as what we're going to do. And the last time we spoke was just prior to the Conor Ben signing, which when it happened was like, oh, holy shit, wow, oh my God, oh my God. But the reality of that is that he's most likely never going to fight on a Zuffa boxing show on Paramount Plus. So it really doesn't fulfill anything as far as the original message and goal and direction of Zuffa boxing as it was explained. Um, they're talking more about the Sky deal, and I assume that ends up maybe on pay-per-view or something here. I don't know. That's the thing is we don't know. It's not like they signed him and they said Paramount Plus this day main event versus this person. So, of course, Eddie's going to take a hard stance. But I also believe in Dana and his hard work and his focus, and he knows boxing. Maybe not as well as those guys, or has he probably as well, but not the experience promoting. I worry more about the confusion and the convolution and is this even a Zuffa boxing event? And who's paying? Who's the guy paying the purse? And what does ring have to do with this? And it seems muddled. Uh, you know what I mean?
But even the Sky Sports thing, like Eddie was saying, that's in 1 month. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It almost seems like Dana thinks because the UFC they can walk in and on 1 week away and put something on that he can do it in this too. And I don't think that's going to be the way it happens.
Yeah. Well, that's what they're used to. That's the timeline that the UFC is used to doing. And to their credit, they have proven that they can do it and they can keep the train rolling. So I will say that. The other thing is, how can you announce this big signing? Great, we got this big the popular British fighter quality guy, former Matchroom guy, but you sign him to one fight. So what are we really doing? Are we building a league? Are we building a TV series, or are we just doing that one night? And if you're signing a guy for one fight, then that's one night. And, he's going to be a free agent the next day, and there's four or five other suitors that they're going to be across the table from him and his management when it comes time for him to fight again. So again, it's more confusion, and I don't think Zuffa Boxing is really delivering on the hype that they kind of teased, which is why I took a little bit of I found it odd, Dana's messaging, because we're going to be this, we're going to be that, we're going to be better, we're going to be bigger, but then when you go out and you sign your first big guy, he's not even going to fight on your show on that network. So what are we doing? Are we back to one-off pay-per-views and Paramount Plus gets the farm team? I don't know, and that's the problem when your audience is uncertain, they don't have the confidence. It's tough to get them to tune in on a recurring basis.
Now, what do you think about Eddie saying that, it's kind of shined a light on the UFC's lack of pay?
I mean,
Like
it
getting into
has.
boxing, almost to the point where maybe they would regret getting into boxing because of this light they've shined on their own roster.
I think there's validity to that point because the UFC roster just made the parent company $1 billion a year. And well, let me adjust that and say that I think it affects more the top level echelon of the UFC fighters, right? The champions, really, is what we're talking about. Because let me say that overall, I believe that the UFC model provides more opportunity and more equal pay and more pay in general for more fighters. I think there are more fighters than ever that are able to make a living as a professional mixed martial artist. And that's due to the UFC, and that's due to the number of shows they do and the number of fights they do. So I will say that as a macro analysis, I think the UFC model provides more opportunity and more compensation for more people. Okay, well, boxing is feast or famine, and so if I'm a UFC champion, maybe I feel slighted, or I feel like I'm getting the short end of the stick. But boxing main events have always dwarfed MMA main events, and that's the thing. But if you go down the card, the MMA card, mid card, lower card is making a lot more than your mid card and lower card in boxing. At least that's the way it was in my day. So I do believe it has shined a light. I do believe that it's a valid point for the upper echelon of UFC stars and champions to be like, we are making TKO a shitload of dough for the next 7 years, not just this year, for the next 7 years. So if I'm main eventing a UFC card, I'm looking at Conor Ben's, what is it, 15, 20, who knows what it is. And I'm like, wow, all this work, all this blood, sweat, and tears, this guy, he's popular in the UK. He's had a few big fights, but it just doesn't seem to equal or to match up. So I do see that as as a valid point for some of the UFC roster.
Now, the other thing he had mentioned was he said he was going to bite his tongue a little bit, but he said Aspinall's contract was horrendous. And if he didn't get a raise, he might even suggest to him not to fight at all because, after he pays his taxes and pays his team, there's not much left.
Well, we
Why
talked
bother?
about, yeah, and
How much, I want to get, I just want to say, how much drama can he cause by having this access to Aspinall's contract?
I don't think a lot because every fighter in the UFC is aware of what those contracts look like, and the UFC contracts protect the brand.
But the
And
UFC prevents the fighters from letting people know what's in those contracts.
okay, so there's NDAs, but you know, you got
I don't think it's
fighters.
NDAs. I think it's fear. If
Okay.
fighters tell the public what the contracts are like, they're afraid that there'll be repercussions.
Well, the purses are public knowledge, right? Because the State Athletic Commission reports that. So
Only if they
really,
fight in California.
oh, really? Okay, I thought
Yeah.
that was everywhere. Okay,
Mm-mm.
so what we're talking about is rematch clauses and things like that, things of that nature. Which again, the fighters are going to see as draconian. The brand, the UFC is going to see as necessary, and I see as necessary, right? From sitting on that side of the table, I can certainly sympathize and understand the other side of the table, but pro sports is free agency, which means this guy could hop. So if I build him, I want to keep him. So I'm going to do everything I can in my power to keep him. That's why it's a negotiation. So, that's kind of where I stand on that. As far as seeing the contracts and calling it horrendous, of course he's going to do that. Um, and as far as asking this guy to sit out, hey, that's fine until the rent's due. um, you're probably better off fighting through it, getting through it, and then looking for your big payday. If you're stuck in what you feel like is an unfair or a lower compensation that you think you're worth, fight through it and get out of it, is what I would advise. Otherwise, you're sitting on the bench because I'm sure that they have clauses that will keep him on the bench if he is under contract, as they should. If the UFC offers him a fight, he should take it, unless he has a valid reason not to take it. Um, you signed it, we signed it. We're in this together until this time, and we agreed on the deal points until this time. And when the contract is over, you can go do whatever you want. We're still here. We built you. You were on our airwaves. We made you a star, and you're going to take that star and go get paid by someone else. Well, good luck to you, and that's great, and that's fine, and that's pro sports, and that's free agency. But until that happens, you're inside this contract that we both signed together at the same table. So,
The problem
that's
is,
where I'm at.
I think the thing that he's going to try to challenge is the UFC can keep Tom Aspinall on, forever, really, because they took out these sunset clauses that Ngannou took advantage of. Um,
And fight through
but
it.
I wonder, because Matchroom does have their own high-powered attorneys. Maybe their goal is to get him out of this contract.
Maybe more hassle than it's worth. Um, because I'm sure, excuse me, I'm sure that the purse has probably already been decided upon. So fight through it, make your paydays, and then, take your ball and leave if you're not happy with your current situation. That's what I would say. I mean, I don't know if any fighter has ever really benefited from sitting out for so long. They have a small window and they have to capitalize while inside that small window. So, I can understand he can do whatever he wants, and management is going to tell him what they think is best for him and his future. But like I said, you got to get yourself into that contract, fight through it, fulfill your obligation, and then leave if you want, if you're not happy. That's what I would say. That's my kind of my stance on that.
The only thing is, when you get to two fights, they're going to want you to sign a new deal, and if you don't, that's when they would sit you. You know, they wouldn't let you
Again,
finish out the contract.
that needs to be gamed out ahead of time, and you need to protect your future, and you need to protect that window. And that's why you have managers, that's why you have agents, that's why you have lawyers. They're all getting a cut. So they need to protect you.
That's why I
Um,
think he got with Hearn, because if push comes to shove, maybe Eddie, unlike some of these other UFC managers who have no interest in really
yeah, or
helping you.
or he puts on a pair of boxing gloves
That's what I
and
mean. I think that's what they would intend to do if UFC doesn't give him a raise. Because
right.
Eddie said in the thing, we aren't necessarily trying to get out of the contract. We just want to have meaningful discussions on what the pay is going to be, rather than him get paid $1 million
Mhm.
and get his eyes gouged out and have 4 surgeries after.
Mm. How did Ngannou finally get out of his?
He had a sunset clause, so it was a little bit different, which they took out after that situation.
They learned their
Uh,
lesson with
yeah, he had to
Francis.
wait several years though.
Mm.
Where you had and you can explain to people what a sunset clause is, if you've dealt with it before.
I haven't. I haven't. I'm
Well,
assuming this is a God.
apparently it would be something where he can either fight out his contract or it's going to end at this point.
Okay, the term ends at some point.
Right. You see
Yeah.
now the other guys, they can just keep, they don't have one.
Yeah, that's a tough one. But if they're guaranteeing a certain amount of offered fights, then it can't be so slanted is what I would think. I mean, I'm sure it's as slanted as it can be. But there's got to be outs. And if there are not outs, then you should have never signed it. But again, when it's the only show in town, you feel obligated. Um, what'll be interesting is if a real domestic competitor like Netflix MVP establishes themselves, UFC is really going to have to, I know it's already tight, but they're going to have to tighten it up even more, if possible, because now you're going to have talent that has other places to go. And if you're building a star and they're not being paid what they think they're deserved of, they're going to look to hop. And now they have a place to hop. They haven't really had a place to hop unless you want to go overseas and not, your friends and family can't watch you on TV, or it's harder to watch you on TV and you're not a star here, or it's harder to make yourself a star here. So, like I said, it's really a disruption. It really shakes stuff up. Like I said, that the UFC has never really had to deal with. Even going back to my days, we've never really had to deal with anyone that had the distribution and the purse and the pockets that we did, even in the SEG days. We were kind of the oldest show in town.
Now, maybe talk a little bit about the White House card. I think some people feel like it's a little bit of a letdown, because it seems like their strategy these days is to overpromise and then underdeliver. They were saying we're going to have 6 title fights. Well, that
Who
didn't
was saying
happen.
that? Was that Trump or was that Dana?
That was Trump, but I think Dana was saying,
Well,
this is going to be the greatest card ever.
yeah, define greatest, right? Does that mean you're going to see all the top contenders or a few of the champ? Who knows, right? I think Dana was probably thinking the greatest because of the venue and the spectacle and the cachet of having that type of stage, and that's certainly a big deal. But then the realities sink in. Who are we going to get? Who do we have? Right? Who do we have on our current roster? Because they don't want to go out again. We're kind of stuck with what we got, and we have the stars that we have. And it would be not on brand for the UFC to try to go out and do a fight like a Gina and Ronda or an old faves kind of a fight that maybe everyone wants to see, but just isn't on brand and isn't what they're trying to do. So, who's the biggest star in the UFC? So Topuria is going to fight on it, right? He's great. Um, And any other that's the thing, I don't even necessarily know. I know that Taporia was on, and then they were talking about they didn't want foreigners, and then he was off, but then he's on. He's fighting, right? He's going to defend.
Yeah, he's gonna fight Justin Gaethje.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So that's a quality fight. Um, it's certainly worthy of a main event. Is it the greatest? Is it the headline of the greatest card ever? Well, maybe not, but maybe they go in and fight their ass off, and it's an incredible fight and a great show. But again, they're kind of they got to deal with what they got, right?
Hmm. Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, I'm sure they'll get a lot of views. I don't know if they get more than Netflix. I don't think they will. Even
Yeah.
though it is at the White House, I know a lot of people probably will want to check it out just for the this one time experience. Maybe people that don't watch the UFC normally, but I still think Netflix is going to outdraw just because of the amount of subscribers.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're starting with 300 million, you have to do a very small percentage to get
Right.
into the millions, which these days, if you can attract millions of households or eyeballs, that's a big deal. Um, and with Paramount starting off with whatever it is, 70, 80, for Netflix to do 3%, say, in 10 million homes, Paramount has to do like 12%, 15%. So it's not going to happen. I don't care where the show, if you could do the show on the moon. It's not going to happen when you're starting with 300 million households. Not to mention the fact that you've got the two biggest female MMA stars ever. You've got a beloved champion, heavyweight champion, that hasn't fought in MMA in a while and has only expanded his star by going into boxing and looking good in the ring. And then you throw Diaz in there, and everybody loves him, right? So he's a big star too, and a UFC legend, right? So they've got a lot going for them. They don't need to do a too high a percentage buy rate to
Right.
get into really serious numbers.
And let's say it crushes the White House show. I mean, I know there would be like on social media, they'd have right next to each other the viewership, like I'm sure Jake Paul would put on there 10 million versus 2 million or whatever. You know,
Hmm.
how, what impact would that have?
Well, you better believe it's going to be a talking point. What impact does it have? Well,
As a
like I said,
talking point, yeah, that's what I mean. What impact?
it legitimizes the MVP Netflix MMA venture. And it puts them, wow, to be ahead of the UFC in viewership in your first event, it's a pretty big deal. And it says a lot. And like I've said, they're stacked already with the card, with the superstars they have on the card, with the platform, the network that they have distributing, with the promoter they have, and his promotional capabilities. They got a lot of aces in their hands. So it totally, they can come out and do a big viewership. It totally legitimizes what they're doing. I mean, the card alone, I think, legitimizes what they're doing. So again, they're building with regard to credibility and position, right, in the MMA world. They go right to number two after one show, maybe even, you know what I mean? And they'll argue that they're number one.
Yeah,
But talk to me in 30 years
yeah,
and 300 plus fights. But the reality is we live in a very short news cycle type of day, type of time. And if they can come out and say, we did three times, we did five times the viewership of the UFC on our very first event. That's a major talking point that gets attention from fighters, advertisers, everyone in the world, I think. It would be a big accomplishment. And
yeah.
it's likely to happen.
The other thing I saw with the power of Netflix was the Anthony Joshua. Like I told you on social media, especially TikTok, I noticed that like women discovered Anthony Joshua for the first time in their lives.
Hmm.
They saw this handsome guy, really muscular. Only because they have Netflix is basically like cable
Yeah.
at this point. People just what's on cable
Yep.
today,
Yep.
what's on Netflix today, and they see the ad and they just click on it, even if they're not
Yep.
boxing people. They just do it just to see what's going on.
Curiosity. Curiosity. You'll get curiosity. Rhonda and Gina causes a lot of curiosity. All those young women that idolized and held Gina and Ronda especially, as heroes. They're grown up now, and there's a lot of them out there. So, yeah, I think, that signing, that fight alone, and we talked about it, I think it has so many angles that lead to viewership, buzz, promotion, anticipation, excitement, all that stuff. So yeah, the chance, I mean, they're going to do more female viewership then I guess the female viewership is either going to equal or better or rival the Ronda's viewership when she was the face of the UFC. Just by having her and the popularity and even the crossover of her and Gina, Gina doing the Star Wars stuff and Ronda doing the TV and the movies and they crossed over into pop culture and they went beyond the fight game. So I really think the potential for them to draw eyeballs is huge. And that's why, you got to love kind of an old faves fight like that is because it's a guaranteed draw. And yeah, maybe a dud, but there's only that's up to the fighters, but when you're talking about how are we going to draw eyeballs? Well, we need names. We need names that people know. We need fights that people want to see from a curiosity standpoint, from a hardcore fan standpoint. And that's why I think their card and their attitude is is good. Because like I said, the UFC is kind of stuck with what they got. We used to bring back Tank Abbott. We used to bring back Dan Severn. And I know it's not the same, but it's the same mentality. Bringing back your face, bringing back Ken Shamrock, bringing back people that will create excitement and interest and curiosity from the fight world and beyond. I like that. As a promoter, I like that.
Yeah. One other thing, Rhonda kind of publicly said some things at the press conference about UFC where Dana's kind of having to answer to shareholders now, which is something you didn't have to go through, but is something we talked about. How much challenge does that present when
A
you've
huge
been
shot.
doing things this way forever?
Mm, yeah,
Now you decided to sell, and now you're answering to somebody else.
it's a huge challenge. I mean, potentially a huge challenge, right? Because if everyone's on the same page, it's not really a huge challenge. But if the shareholders and the board and whomever's running TKO calls Dana and says, "Hey, we need to shave this much off the production budget. We need to shave this much off the fighter budget. We need to increase the number of shows," right? So that sucks. That's not a great position to be in. And I think that's kind of what she was hinting at. And the other thing she's hinting at is like, "Hey, we signed our deal. This money's guaranteed for the next 7 years. You're going to pay us regardless of what fights we put on TV or not." Um, so there's a lot of potential challenges when corporate America gets involved and when greed can take over and when shareholder price becomes the priority. Because you don't need to listen to the fans anymore. You don't need to take their temperature anymore. You don't even have to really worry about their reaction anymore. And that's sad to say because the fans are the ones that got you there. But if I've got my guaranteed deal for $1 billion a year and my priority is the board and the shareholders, and I think you've lost focus a little bit, or at least you've lost I don't know, the reason why you're in it, which was to make great fights and make this thing huge. And that's why, we talked about the Paramount deal being kind of a cash grab versus a growth of the sport, expansion of the sport uh, decision. And so maybe we're seeing the ripples of that in the matchmaking. Maybe we're seeing the ripples of that in the budgets. But yeah, any time when you're a slave to the bottom line, maybe the fans aren't going to get what they want, which sucks.
I want to ask you one more thing. I saw a tweet, something on X, not Twitter, X. um, I saw a guy talking about sustainability of Netflix versus UFC's model, every week model. Um, can maybe you explain why it's, when you're doing a show, maybe Netflix do a show every couple of months or whatever. Maybe compare the two. A show where you're talking about sustainability, a show running every week, they've already got all the money they need,
Mhm.
versus this. Maybe you could explain to someone why this still has value to do what Netflix would do if that's what they intend to do.
It has tremendous value, um, especially if you have the platform that can generate the advertiser money, which you can turn around and put into the purse and get top names. When you have a weekly show and you are on a train that never stops moving, the forest from the trees is kind of a cliche or a metaphor that comes to mind because you're just so caught up in where are we next week? And is everyone healthy? And did everyone make weight? And where are we the next week? And is the trucks going here? And we're going there. And the octagon's got to get there and there. And you get so caught up in the schedule that you don't necessarily have time to step back and say, how do we make it bigger? How do we make it better? Who can we bring in? Right? If you're working on a set schedule, which is a crazy grind, and you have hundreds of fighters that you need to get fights, you're caught up in your very busy world, and you don't always get a chance to take a look around, and you don't get a chance to think outside your own box, right? You have this crazy box and this crazy train that has to keep rolling every week, every couple weeks, every month, whatever it is. You don't have that time to step back, take a breather, get outside your box and say, what's happening in the world? What's going to bring more excitement to this event? What can we do a nice slow build with? There's no such thing as a slow build in the UFC. There's it's hard to create and generate momentum and anticipation. When something is in front of you all the time, you tend to get desensitized to it, right? Familiarity breeds comfort. So it's like, yeah, it's my safety blanket. It's there every week, but it kind of becomes a little bit saturated and not sharp, becomes a little bit mushy, not instead of being sharp. When you're doing more spaced out shows that you can change the way you book, or you can change your presentation. You have time to do that. You have time to experiment. The UFC, because of their schedule, they have to do things in a certain way. It's very disciplined. It's very to the T. Production has to be this way. The venue has to be this way. The fighters have to be this way. The weigh-ins have to be. It has to be that way in order to keep the train rolling. If you space out your shows, you can experiment more. You can do different things. You can bring in different people. You can step back and say, what should we do next? The UFC knows what they're doing next. They don't have the room to step back and say, what should we do next? You know what I mean?
Or how can we make this better?
How can we make it bigger? How can
What
we
you
make it
get
better?
is what you're gonna get.
Right.
That's
What can we change? The I used to spend every Sunday night after a show Friday night watching the show with my legal pad, looking at what we did right and what we did wrong and how we can improve and what felt like it dragged or where the music wasn't great or whether the screens we didn't show enough or more tape pieces and stuff. When you're locked into the type of grueling schedule the UFC has, you don't really have time to make big changes or experiment. And, with a show that's more spread out, you can do that. You can react and you can change, and you can adjust. So it allows you a lot more freedom, that's for sure. and a lot more build, right? If you have time to build a huge, if you have 2 months to build a huge fight versus promoting promoting a show on your weekly show, it all kind of gets muddled versus, staying sharp and getting people pointed towards a date in the future where this big thing is happening. So it gives you a chance. It also gives you a chance to have every show be a huge show, right? The UFC, every show cannot be a huge show. But if you do 5, 6 shows a year, every couple months, every show's a big show.
That's what Pride was doing.
Yeah.
Pride
That's
was
what they,
doing
that's
that,
what
and
we used to,
people were
that's what we used
dying.
to do.
People were staying up all night to see those shows.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you have the build and you have the anticipation and you don't have to have the cards set to, you know what I mean? Everything doesn't have to be dialed in. You can evolve and you can grow and you can move towards whatever direction the wind seems to be blowing to make the show bigger, make the show better, make the show more exciting. So freedom, not having to do a show every week gives you freedom to step back and look around.
But what I'm saying is, people are saying, well, this isn't going to be sustainable. Can you explain to them how it could be?
Why not? Why not? Why isn't it sustainable?
You guys sustained it,
Yeah, exactly. That was what we
and
did
so did Pride.
for 10 years we did
Granted, it
that.
was a
Pride did
different
that.
audience, but they sustained it. Same kind of schedule, and so did you guys.
Yeah, I don't understand why anyone would think it's not sustainable to do, say it's every other month, to do 6 big shows, big MMA shows a year. To me, and maybe it's because it's the way I did it when I ran the UFC. But to me, that's a better way to do it versus weekly, or whatever. But again, when you get caught up in more shows, more money, more TV rights, you get caught up in the machine of it all. Versus, hey, we're on pay-per-view 5, 6 times a year. Every show is a huge show. We're going to stack it with incredible fights. We're going to bring you incredible entertainment value. We're going to put a lot of thought into everything we do. We're going to throw you some curveballs. We're going to sign people that you haven't seen in a long time, old faves that we're going to bring back because we know everyone wants to see them and we think they still have a little gas in the tank. It's almost easier to sustain a show that you're doing 5, 6 times a year than it is a show that you're doing 50 shows a year. It's more sustainable that way because you have breathing room. And if you're only having that many shows, and if every show is perceived as a huge show, well, the advertisers are going to pay accordingly, right? So financially, I don't see any issue with doing that. And listen, you look at their card, and they're talking about Diaz getting what, 10 million bucks? If he's getting 10, Ronda and Gina must be getting 20, 15, 20. What's Francis? What's Ngannou getting? Same as the women, who knows? But if they're willing to sink 50, 60 million dollars into a purse, they know it's coming back. They wouldn't be doing this unless they knew it was coming back. And like I said, I think it's more sustainable to do a limited schedule than it is to do a weekly thing. I guess the UFC has trained everyone to think that MMA is weekly, but back in the day, man, with the UFC in the SEG days and the early Zuffa days, and with Pride, and both shows were successful, and we only did, every other month pretty much. So perfectly sustainable as long as the money works out. And I'm going to assume the money works out because the potential eyeballs are there to attract the high profile and high paying advertisers, which in turn allows you to pay a big name fighters appropriate purses to get them to show up. So I think it's even more sustainable, to tell you the truth. I honestly, I like it better. The hassle factor involved in doing a weekly show, my God, especially if it's traveling around the country, around the world, man, oh man, carrying 500, 600 fighters on your roster. Whoa, headache after headache. I can't tell you the headaches that are associated with that. So yeah, give me 5, 6 kick-ass shows a year. I'll take that any day.
Now, let me ask you one last thing on the subject of MVP. They announced their women's boxing, all women's boxing, deal with ESPN. How do you think
Hmm.
that's going to go?
Probably not well.
You don't think so?
Probably not. I don't know. I mean,
Why get
uh,
involved with it? If they're
well,
experimenting.
yeah, experimenting and because they're invested, and who knows if ESPN, made them an offer they couldn't refuse. ESPN just lost the UFC, so they're trying to fill holes in their programming selection. And MVP has had success, obviously, with Amanda Serrano, and she's been great for them. So MVP has been fantastic and has been great for the sport, for women's boxing in general. But I think history tells us that it's a tough sell. Boxing mid-level, or it's a tough boxing is a tough sell. It's not the most exciting thing to watch, and I think we're long past the days of a huge number of diehard boxing fans that are going to tune in and week out. So, it's a great step for women's boxing. It's a great platform, and that's all great. But I think if we look at history and we look at all the weekly cable boxing shows that have come and gone, I assume this one will as well, sadly.
Yeah, because I think like Alicia Baumgardner, who's someone else that they were featuring on some of these cards, Jake Paul card. She hasn't got the same kind of that Serrano and Taylor did, and that's because they tried to kill each other from the opening bell
Right,
in their
right.
first
And,
fight.
and even right, I was going to say even their third fight was, I would say, lackluster. So yeah, it's I think boxing is a tough sell, which is why the only thing that sells in boxing is main events. And if you have a 1 or 2 hour show on ESPN every week, you're talking about four, five, six fights, and is everyone going to hang around? And do you have the wherewithal or the talent stable to have a quality main event every week? Probably not. You're more trying to build, uh, a roster. And I don't know if these days people have the patience or the interest in boxing to make that viable.
That's a struggle for Zuffa boxing.
Struggle forever. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, every boxing series is gone, right? The ones we grew up with have gone. And it's a sign of the times, and it's a sign of the ever changing and saturated, and it's a competitive, the attention spans and the recreational dollar, and they're very competitive these days. And I don't know if people have the patience for mid-level boxing, which is probably what we're talking about.
Now, one other thing I know I keep bringing it, the zone. All these other entities are now on the zone. Golden Boy, Matchroom, Queensberry, and what's the other one I'm missing?
Aram, Top Rank.
Yeah, Top Rank. So, what do you think about that? It almost seems like they're all unifying against this
Yeah,
other force that's over here.
yeah, I think Dana has pissed them off so much or threatened them so much that they've decided to team up. And I think it's a good move by them. I think it's an interesting move, a good move. Obviously, DAZN benefits hugely um, from this, but I think for all of them to decide that they're going to have one platform for distribution is a good idea. I do think it's a good idea. Uh, just so that you can compete with the other platforms, that are featuring boxing. So, yeah, interesting that has happened. That Dana has turned enemies into allies. But he can be he can be that polarizing, right?
Yeah, and because they're all on the same network, they can do these cross promotional fights that Zuffa can't get to.
Yeah, you're going to see them working together, which you may have seen anyway. If Oscar's got a guy and Eddie's got a guy, promoters come together to do the big fights. That does happen. You do see that. You've always seen that. But now they're all working towards a common goal, and they're all going to benefit from the TV side of that. And presumably they would have probably equal shares of all that. So I think it's a good move by them to kind of gang up and all get on one platform. I do think that's smart. So and probably something that was not anticipated by Dana and Zuffa. And we're sitting here talking like Zuffa boxing is competitive with these guys, and it's a lot of credit to give a promotion that really hasn't done anything, right? It's just
Yeah, that's
because
what
they have
Eddie's saying. What have you done? You're like sixth or
it's
seventh place right now. You're not
this is all
nowhere
because
near
they have
us.
this is all because they have Dana White. Dana White is such a huge star that he can make people think that Zuffa Boxing is actually competing with those organizations, and they're not. And it's been shown that when they are, it's really not even them. So again, we're back to what are we talking about? Dana is that big. I tell you, it's amazing that he's that big a star that he can go out and put out one video or one announcement, and suddenly what was nothing is now a big deal. But I think time will expose that for what it is. Um, but yeah, it is quite. It speaks volumes of his size and star, his shine for sure, his
Puerto
rub.
Rico MMA. What's the update? Do we have any?
Well, we've got a slight update where we're probably looking. We haven't been able to tie up all loose ends, so we're probably looking at a fall debut, but we are still looking at 2026. Um, because we want to make it happen this year. We think it's the opportunity is there, and it's also the 30th anniversary of UFC 8, which was in 1996 here in Puerto Rico. So we think that's a special number and a special anniversary, and will add some excitement to the event. So yeah, so probably later in the year than planned. A lot of promoters from all the world of entertainment and sports. Not a lot of stuff happens here in the summertime. Um, a lot of people go away. It's just not a big time for events. So I could see us moving into the fall. Kids come back to school, families are back and settled. But yes, still full steam ahead, and looking forward to a debut in late 2026, 30th anniversary of UFC 8. We're bringing back PRMMA, bringing back MMA to the island. Should be exciting.
Yes, everyone be on the lookout for that Puerto Rico MMA. James Wormy back in the MMA space.
I will
And
break that news here on your show, Todd.
I appreciate it.
I owe it to you, and I appreciate being here. Thanks again for having me.
Yeah, it's always fascinating to talk to you.
A lot of news
Thanks.
happening. And that's a cool thing too, is the fans have never had more stuff to critique and quarterback, right? Whether it's the boxing or the MMA. It seems like this is a great time for fans. It's a great time for fighters. Um, so yeah, I mean, let's hope it keeps going. I hope we get some great fights in the next few months, right?
So everyone follow James. Can you tell him where to follow you on Instagram and X?
Yep, it's on X, it's James A. Wormy, and on Instagram, it's Wormy James. So yeah, happy to interact. Anyone has a question or a comment, always love talking old school UFC and MMA current events.
James, as always, I appreciate taking the time. Everybody who watched these episodes, channel and next episode.
My pleasure. Thanks, Todd. Thanks for tuning in to Wormy's Wisdom, where we talk old school UFC and MMA current events. I'm James Wormy, UFC executive, announcer, and producer of over 40 events worldwide during the SEG and Zuffa years. Wormy's Wisdom, here on the Todd Atkins MMA Podcast Network.